The drive back home that Friday evening felt as routine as ever. The tires made their usual rhythm against the asphalt, the radio softly playing oldies, and the faint aroma of coffee clung to my shirt from the afternoon. Traffic crawled along, broken occasionally by a horn or a driver's impatient move. The thought of the weekend ahead was the only relief from the constant grind of emails and looming deadlines. Nicole, my wife of 9 years, had texted earlier, asking what I felt like having for dinner. I told her I was in the mood for something simple, something comforting. Mac and cheese sounded like just the thing after the week I'd endured. As I waited at a red light, my phone buzzed from where it rested on the passenger seat. I glanced over and picked it up with one hand, curious. It was a message from Nicole. A photo. I opened it, smooth skin, the curve of a shoulder, and the hint of lace. My breath hitched. Before I could take another look, the photo vanished, replaced by the familiar 3 dots indicating she was typing. "Sorry, that wasn't meant for you," her message popped up. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. The words replayed in my head, "Not meant for you." What did she mean? My chest tightened, and my pulse quickened as I quickly typed a response, trying to sound nonchalant. "What was that?" I sent back, my fingers trembling slightly. The dots reappeared, lingering for what felt like forever. Finally, her reply came through. "Nothing. Just something personal. Forget about it." Forget about it? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind swirled with questions, and my heart raced. The car behind me honked loudly, jolting me back to reality. The light had turned green. Tossing the phone onto the seat, I pressed on the gas pedal, but my thoughts were all over the place. The image of that photo and the phrase "not meant for you" looped in my head. If it wasn't for me, then who was it for? By the time I pulled into the driveway, the setting sun cast long shadows across the yard. The warm light spilling through the blinds gave the house a golden glow, but for the first time, it didn't feel like home. I grabbed my briefcase and headed inside, my mind still racing. Nicole was in the kitchen, her hair tied back in a messy bun, humming softly as she moved around. She didn't turn to look at me when I walked in. "Hey," she greeted me casually, her voice light but with a hint of strain. "Dinner's in the oven. How was work?" "Fine," I said, setting my things on the counter. My eyes stayed on her as she moved around the kitchen, her back turned to me. I wanted to ask her about the photo, about the odd message, but the words stayed lodged in my throat. Instead, I grabbed a bottle of water and leaned against the counter. "How about you? How was your day?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. She turned briefly, flashing a quick smile. "Busy. Just meetings back to back. You know how it is." Her phone was on the counter beside her, face down. My gaze flicked to it, and my stomach churned. "Anything interesting happen?" I pressed, hoping she'd slip up. She shrugged without looking at me, stirring something on the stove. "Not really. Same old stuff." The knot in my chest tightened. I wanted so badly to believe her, to dismiss the gnawing suspicion growing in my gut. But the image of that photo and her words "not meant for you" refused to let me. I studied her every movement, her calm demeanor, and the practiced smile she wore when she finally turned to me again. "Everything okay?" she asked, a slight furrow in her brow. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." That night, Nicole fell asleep quickly, her breathing evening out as the dim light from the bedside lamp cast faint shadows on the walls. I lay beside her, staring up at the ceiling, unable to quiet the storm in my head. The photo, the tone of her text, and the way she brushed it all off, it didn't sit right with me. Something had shifted, and there was no ignoring it. I glanced at her phone on the nightstand. It sat there, face down, as if it were taunting me. A rush of anger and fear rose in my chest, tightening like a vice. I knew I couldn't let this go, but for now, all I could do was lie there, wide awake, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. I'd never been one to pry or dig through someone's personal things, but tonight was different. Something felt off, wrong in a way I couldn't shake. The unease gnawed at me, growing louder in my head until I couldn't ignore it any longer. Moving carefully, I slid out of bed, making sure the mattress barely shifted beneath me. Nicole stirred faintly, her hand brushing against the blanket, but she didn't wake. Holding my breath, I reached for her phone on the nightstand, clutching it tightly as I tiptoed out of the bedroom. In the faint glow of the living room, I sank onto the couch, the phone sitting heavy in my hand. My palms were damp, and my heart hammered against my ribs. A pang of guilt hit me, snooping felt wrong, like crossing a line, but the need to know overwhelmed any hesitation. I stared at the screen for a long moment before my thumb finally moved, unlocking it with a soft click. Nicole had never bothered to change her password, and now I was in. I scrolled through her apps, my fingers trembling. Everything seemed pristine, too pristine. Her email, social media, even her photo gallery, all looked spotless. My stomach churned as I opened her messages, scanning through the conversations. Most were mundane, the usual chatter between friends and coworkers. But one thread stood out. The name saved on the contact was Jake. No last name. At first, the messages seemed harmless enough. The tone was casual, but there was something off. I skimmed through the recent texts until one stopped me cold. Excited to shoot with you again next week. Let's aim for something even hotter this time. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My eyes darted back through the thread, taking in the compliments about her energy and talent, mixed with details about dates, locations, and vague mentions of roles. It didn't make sense. Not until I opened one message that contained a link. My stomach sank as I clicked it. The link led to a sleek, professional-looking website. For a moment, I convinced myself it was something innocuous, an acting gig, maybe. But as I scrolled, dread pooled in my gut. It was an adult site. My hand shook as I navigated the menu, each tap on the screen feeling heavier than the last. A list of featured performers appeared, and then I saw her. Nicole. Her face stared back at me, her confident smile identical to the one she had given me just hours earlier in the kitchen. It was unmistakable. My wife. My chest tightened as I clicked on her profile, unable to stop myself. A different username appeared next to her picture, but there was no denying it was her. Videos filled the screen, dozens of them. Each thumbnail was explicit, and I felt my mind reel as I realized the extent of what I was seeing. I clicked on one, my hand moving almost involuntarily. The video began to play, and within seconds, I regretted it. There she was, Nicole, in a room I didn't recognize, surrounded by strangers. Men. Mostly black and brown men dominated the scenes, their presence unmistakable. Her laughter rang out, her movements brazen, and her words laced with a confidence I'd never seen in her before. It was her, but not the woman I thought I knew. My stomach churned violently, and I forced myself to close the video, slamming the phone down onto the coffee table. I stood shakily, the room spinning around me. My knees felt weak, and the air seemed heavier with every breath I took. The life I thought I knew, the marriage I had believed in, it was all crumbling around me. Leaning against the wall for support, I tried to process what I had just discovered. Nicole, the woman I'd shared nearly a decade of my life with, had been living a double life. Every little thing I had brushed off, the late-night meetings, the new perfume, the times she dismissed my questions, came flooding back, now painted in a new, painful light. This wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. A public lie, laid bare for anyone with an internet connection to see. The phone buzzed again on the table, breaking the suffocating silence. My eyes darted to the screen, where another message from Jake had appeared. You were incredible last time. Can't wait to see you on set again soon. I clenched my fists, anger bubbling to the surface and threatening to consume me. It wasn't just anger, it was rage, humiliation, and heartbreak all tangled into one. My chest heaved as I fought to think clearly, to figure out what to do next. One thing was certain, though. I couldn't unsee what I'd just discovered, and I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. The man I had been just an hour ago, the husband who trusted his wife without hesitation, was gone. What remained was a hollow shell of that man, struggling to stay upright under the weight of betrayal. I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands as the enormity of it all pressed down on me like a tidal wave. And Nicole? She was only a few feet away, sleeping soundly, completely unaware that her carefully woven web of lies was unraveling right beneath her nose. The early morning hours were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt oppressive. The only sound in the house was Nicole's steady, peaceful breathing. It was maddening, knowing she was resting so easily while my world had just imploded. I sat on the couch, my eyes fixed on her phone lying on the coffee table. My mind buzzed with a toxic cocktail of rage, humiliation, and an unnerving sense of calm clarity. This wasn't a situation for shouting matches or confrontations. Nicole had built an entire life on deceit, hiding a part of herself from me, and from everyone else. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Not this time. Instead, I picked up her phone again. With cold determination, I started taking screenshots, messages from Jake, links to her profile, even thumbnails of the videos that had shattered my perception of her. My stomach churned as I went through it all, but I forced myself to keep going. I needed every piece of proof. Once I was done, I sent all the evidence to my own phone, ensuring I had a record of everything. Then, I opened a drawer in the living room and pulled out a small box I'd ordered years ago but never thought I'd actually use. It was a set of discreet surveillance equipment, tiny cameras and voice recorders I had initially bought for home security. Now, they had a different purpose. I placed the cameras in strategic spots, the living room, the kitchen, even the bedroom. The voice recorders were tucked into hidden corners, spots where they'd remain undetected but pick up every sound. It felt invasive, violating, even, but I reminded myself that Nicole had already obliterated every boundary of trust. This wasn't about fairness anymore, this was about survival. By the time I finished, the first rays of daylight were breaking through the blinds. I grabbed a piece of paper and jotted down a note, keeping it short and emotionless. Nicole, I know everything. I've included proof so there's no denying it. Don't contact me. We're done. Good luck explaining yourself to everyone. I left the note on the kitchen counter, alongside printed screenshots of her messages and the link to her profile on the site. For a moment, I stood there, taking in the house, the life we had built together. The photos on the walls, the furniture we had carefully picked out, the kitchen where we'd shared countless meals. All of it felt hollow now, as if it had been part of a cruel joke I was only just starting to understand. With my packed bag in hand, I walked out of the house without looking back. The drive to my old apartment felt like I was drifting through a surreal dream. I hadn't set foot in the place since Nicole and I had moved in together, and it felt strange going back. The apartment was small and cramped, but it was mine, a space where her lies couldn't reach me. Thankfully, the landlord had kept it as a short-term rental, and I still had a key. Inside, the air was stale, and the walls were bare. But for the first time that night, I felt a faint glimmer of relief. It wasn't much, but it was freedom. Dropping my bag on the floor, I collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but far from at peace. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me back to the moment. It was time to take the final step. With a few taps, I forwarded the link to Nicole's profile to everyone close to her, family, friends, anyone whose number I had. Her parents, her sister, her best friends, they all received the same message. Thought you might want to see what Nicole has been up to. I didn't add anything else. The evidence spoke louder than any explanation could. As I hit send, a grim sense of satisfaction settled over me. She had spent years hiding this from everyone, living a double life without consequence. Now, the truth would be out in the open, and she'd have no one to blame but herself. I lay back on the couch as the sun climbed higher in the sky, its warm light filtering into the room. My thoughts raced, torn between the devastation of what I had lost and the small comfort of knowing I had taken control of what I could. How long had she been living this double life? Had she been laughing at me all along, watching as I poured my heart and soul into a marriage that was nothing but a facade to her? The thought made my stomach churn. At least we didn't have kids, thank God for that. That realization was the only faint silver lining in this storm. If we'd had children, they would have been caught in the web of lies and chaos she had spun. The idea of dragging innocent lives into this mess sent a shiver through me. For the first time in hours, I let myself exhale. I pictured her waking up, finding the note, and realizing that her carefully guarded secret was now laid bare. The humiliation, the panic, the fury, it would all hit her like a freight train. And she'd have to face it alone. It was the kind of poetic justice I hadn't even known I craved. I glanced at my phone, debating whether to block her number now or wait to see if she'd try to explain herself. The thought of her frantic attempts to reach me almost brought a bitter smile to my face. She'd wake up thinking it was just another ordinary day, only to find her world shattered. That thought brought me a strange sense of peace, a glimmer of control in a night that had spiraled into chaos. As I finally drifted into a restless sleep on the couch, one thought echoed in my mind: she had hidden this from me for years. What else hadn't I known? Sitting in the dim light of my old apartment, I opened my laptop and connected to the hidden cameras I had installed in the house. The feed was sharp, showing the quiet kitchen where I had left the note and the damning evidence. The house was still, Nicole still asleep, unaware of what was waiting for her. The hours crawled by, the anticipation clawing at me. I alternated between pacing the cramped living room and sipping coffee that had long gone cold. My stomach twisted with a mix of anger and dread. Finally, around mid-morning, I saw movement on the screen. Nicole shuffled into the kitchen, her hair a mess and still wearing the oversized shirt she slept in. She poured herself a cup of coffee, completely oblivious to the note sitting on the counter. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding as I watched her take a sip, then pause when her eyes landed on the folded paper. She picked it up, her brow furrowing as she read the short message. Her expression shifted, confusion melted into surprise, then hardened into something colder. Her lips pressed into a tight line as she scanned the screenshots and the printed link. Setting the note down, she grabbed her phone. I watched as her fingers flew across the screen, likely opening her messages or checking her profile on the site. Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought I'd finally see the panic, the shame, the guilt. But then she laughed. It wasn't a laugh of nervousness or fear, it was bitter, hollow, and sharp. The sound sent a chill through me. She tossed the papers back onto the counter, muttering something under her breath. I adjusted the volume on the voice recorder to catch her words. "This is what he thinks will hurt me," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Doesn't he realize I've been doing this for the money? This was never about him." I froze, her words cutting deeper than I expected. For the money. That's what this was about. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had reduced everything to financial transactions. She began pacing the kitchen, muttering to herself. All that whining about work stress, his little pity parties over deadlines, and here I am paying the bills half the time, she sneered, laughing again, this time sharper, meaner. "If he thinks this is going to break me, he doesn't know me at all." I leaned back in my chair, her words slicing through me like knives. I had braced myself for guilt, maybe anger or denial, but not this. Not the cold indifference. Not the smug arrogance of a woman who felt no remorse for shattering everything we had built together. I stared at the screen as she continued ranting, her voice growing louder with every word. Let him sulk. Let him cry. He's the one who's been living in a fantasy this whole time, not me. This is my life, my decisions. Her words echoed in my head, each one a fresh wound. Nicole had always been confident, but this was something else. It was calculated, cruel, and utterly detached from the life I thought we had shared. My chest tightened as I closed the laptop, her voice still ringing in my ears. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a complete dismissal of everything we had been to each other. And I didn't know how to process it. In a fantasy this whole time. Not me. This is my life, my decisions. I don't owe anyone an explanation. Her words echoed in my head like a slap. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Had I been blind to who she truly was from the start? Had I played the fool in this twisted game she'd been running? But then, I reminded myself of the link I had sent to her friends and family. She might not care about my opinion, but the judgment of those closest to her? That would be much harder for her to ignore. This was just the beginning. I watched her storm off to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. The sound reverberated through the feed as I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. The room was silent now, but my mind was a storm of emotions. Her reaction wasn't what I had expected. There wasn't a shred of remorse, not even a flicker of shame. That cold indifference, that brazen confidence, it made everything I had done feel even more justified. Picking up my phone, I scrolled through the messages I had sent to her family and close friends. There were no responses yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. Nicole had spent years crafting the perfect facade, hard-working, devoted, a loving wife. But that mask was about to shatter, and when it did, it wouldn't just be me she had to answer to. I sat there, staring at the blank walls of my old apartment, my thoughts consumed by the woman I had loved for nearly a decade. How long had she been living this lie? How long had I been working tirelessly to build a life for us while she spun a web of deceit? The betrayal felt like a blade twisting deeper every time I thought about it. But I had to remind myself, this was just the first move. Her world might still seem intact to her, but the cracks were already forming. Her parents, her siblings, her closest friends, they would all see the truth. And when they did, I'd be there to witness the fallout. Closing the laptop, I grabbed my phone again. The morning's events swirled in my mind, but I knew I had to act quickly. Nicole's arrogance, her bold indifference, it was clear she wouldn't go down without a fight. If she had been funneling money into her secret life, I had to cut her off before she could weaponize it against me. I dialed Robert, my lawyer. He wasn't just any lawyer, he was the kind of man who thrived in messy situations. The kind of man you called when you needed a shark. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and professional. Jason, what's going on? I need you to freeze every account Nicole has access to, I said, my voice trembling with urgency. Joint accounts, credit cards, everything. Do it now. There was a pause on the other end. Jason, you know I can't just do that without a solid reason. What's going on? I swallowed hard, steadying myself. I'll send you proof. She's been lying to me for years. Funneling money into a double life, adult films, secret accounts, the works. I have evidence. I'll email it to you right now. Robert let out a low whistle. All right. Send me what you've got, and I'll get started. But Jason, he added, his tone cautious, you need to be ready. If she fights back, this could get ugly. It's already ugly, I replied, my jaw tightening. Just do it. When I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small victory in a war I hadn't asked to fight. If Nicole thought she could keep living her double life while using me as her safety net, she was in for a rude awakening. I had barely sat back down when the doorbell rang, the sharp chime cutting through the quiet apartment and jolting me out of my thoughts. My stomach twisted. I didn't need to guess who it was. Cautiously, I walked to the door and opened it. There she was, Nicole, standing on the threshold, arms crossed and face flushed. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a mixture of anger and something else. Panic. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she spat, shoving past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "Why would you send those videos to my family? To everyone?" Nicole's voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. I closed the door slowly, leaning back against it as I faced her. She stormed back and forth across the small living room, her hands flying in frantic gestures. Her anger filled the space, but I didn't flinch. "Why?" I repeated, my voice steady, cold. "Because they deserve to know the truth, just like I did." She stopped in her tracks, spinning to glare at me. "The truth? The truth is you've ruined my life. Do you have any idea what you've done?" A bitter laugh escaped me as I shook my head. "Ruined your life? Nicole, you've been lying to me for years, sneaking around, making who knows how much money from this filth. And you think I'm the problem?" She threw her hands up, her voice dripping with contempt. "Oh, spare me your self-righteous crap, Jason. Do you think I wanted to do this? I didn't have a choice. Do you even know how hard it's been to make ends meet while you sit there, playing the martyr? This was for us, for our future." Her words were so outrageous I almost laughed again, but instead, I stared at her, disbelief etched on my face. "For us? Don't insult me, Nicole. You didn't do this for us. You did it for yourself. For the money. For the thrill. Whatever excuse you need to justify betraying me." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might break, maybe cry. But instead, her expression hardened, and she lashed out. "You're pathetic, Jason. Always playing the victim. You couldn't handle the pressure, so I stepped up. And now you're punishing me for it." "Stepped up?" My voice rose, the anger boiling over. "You call this stepping up? Lying to me? Sneaking around? Dragging our marriage through the mud? That's not stepping up, Nicole. That's cowardice." She stepped closer, her face mere inches from mine, her eyes blazing with fury. "You think you're so noble, don't you? Like you've never made a mistake. Newsflash, Jason, you're a boring, predictable man who couldn't even see what was happening right under his nose." Her words struck like a slap, but I refused to let her see the sting. Straightening, I glared back at her, my voice low and firm. "You're right, I didn't see it. I didn't see the woman I married turning into a stranger. But now I do. And I'll make damn sure everyone else does too." Her eyes widened at my words, the weight of them sinking in. For the first time since she walked in, she looked genuinely shaken. You won't get away with this," she stammered, her voice trembling. "You think you can just destroy me and walk away?" I crossed my arms, unmoving. "Destroy you? No, Nicole. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure the world knows who you really are." Moments later, she spun on her heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind her so hard the walls shook. I stood there in the silence, my chest heaving as the adrenaline began to ebb away. Her words lingered, sharp and venomous, but I shoved them aside. She was lashing out, trying to shift the blame, but I wouldn't let her. I walked back to the couch and sank down, staring at the blank wall in front of me. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. Let her rage, let her scream, the truth was out now, and there was no taking it back. The sun dipped lower outside my apartment window, casting the room in a muted orange glow. I sat on the edge of the couch, my phone in hand, waiting. My conversation with Nicole replayed in my mind, her biting words echoing, but I reminded myself this was only the beginning. I wasn't backing down. The phone buzzed in my hand, jolting me from my thoughts. Robert's name flashed on the screen. I answered immediately, my voice steady despite the simmering tension. "Robert," I said, leaning forward, "what's the update?" He didn't waste any time. "Jason, I've initiated the freeze on all accounts. Effective immediately, she won't have access to any of the joint accounts or shared credit cards." A small wave of relief washed over me. It was a step, a small victory, but a crucial one. "Good," I said, my voice firm. "Let her try and fight. She'll find out soon enough that I'm not playing games anymore." As for her individual accounts, Robert continued, that's a trickier process. But we've filed motions to investigate her financial activities if needed. I exhaled deeply, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Good. That's good. I don't want her using anything I've contributed to for her extracurricular activities. Robert's tone softened slightly. "Jason, I've reviewed the evidence you sent over. This isn't just a standard divorce case anymore. Depending on how she's been funneling money and what she's used it for, we could be looking at potential fraud." I nodded reflexively, even though he couldn't see me. "That's what I'm worried about. She's been living this double life for years, and I have no idea how deep it goes." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Have you thought about filing for divorce? If this is where things are heading, we should move quickly. It's best to establish your position and protect your assets before she has a chance to react." Hearing the word divorce out loud made my chest tighten. It was the logical step, the only step, but it still felt like a hammer blow. For a fleeting moment, memories of the early days of our marriage flickered in my mind. The laughter, the plans, the promises we'd made. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now, a distant echo of something irreparably broken. "I want to file," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "Whatever it takes. Just make sure she can't take another cent from me." "Understood," Robert replied without hesitation. "I'll start drafting the paperwork tonight. Given the evidence we have, we'll file for an at-fault divorce on the grounds of infidelity. That will give you a stronger position when dividing assets and could protect you from any spousal support claims." "Good," I said, my tone hard. "I don't want her getting a penny more than she deserves." There was another pause before Robert spoke again, his voice cautious. "Jason, you should prepare yourself for the possibility that she might retaliate. From what you've described, and based on the evidence, she doesn't seem like the type to go quietly." "I'm ready," I replied, my jaw clenching. "Let her try." When the call ended, I sat there for a moment, the phone still in my hand. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. The accounts were frozen, the divorce was in motion, and I was finally taking back control of my life. But it also marked the end of something I had once believed in wholeheartedly. The woman I thought I knew, the life we had built together, it had all been a lie. The apartment was dark now, the only light coming from the faint glow of the city outside the window. The silence was heavy, but it was far better than the suffocating weight of her lies. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was standing on solid ground, even if it was still unfamiliar and unsteady. The battle wasn't over, but I had taken the first step. Now, it was only a matter of time before the rest of her world collapsed around her. 6 months passed after the divorce was finalized. I sat in the quiet of my new apartment, staring out at the city skyline. The house had been sold, the accounts were secure, and Nicole's carefully constructed world had crumbled just as I'd anticipated. I had moved on to a better place, free from the memories of the life we once shared. I'd cut all ties with her, ignoring the occasional emails and messages she sent in the aftermath. For 6 months, I heard nothing from her. Until today. It started with an email. The subject line read, "Please, Jason. Let's talk." For a moment, I just stared at it, my finger hovering over the mouse. Part of me wanted to delete it outright, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it, and her words spilled out onto the screen. Jason. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. For everything. I've spent the past few months reflecting on what I did and the choices I made. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back, and I hate myself for it. I was selfish, blind to the damage I was causing, and I've lost the one person who truly mattered to me. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know that I regret everything. If I could go back and undo it all, I would in a heartbeat. I miss you, Jason. I miss us. Please, can we talk? Just once. I need to see you. Nicole. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The apology felt empty, like something carefully crafted, rehearsed to sound sincere but ultimately hollow. It was months too late, and all I could hear behind her words was desperation. The fiery defiance she'd shown during our last confrontation was gone, replaced by regret now that her world had crumbled. I closed the email and stared at the blank screen for a long moment. I didn't respond. Instead, I pushed it out of my mind and went about my day, pretending the message had never come. The next day, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Something in me told me to answer. Jason, Nicole's voice came through, soft and hesitant. Thank you for picking up. What do you want, Nicole? I asked, my tone cold and distant. She hesitated. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know I ruined everything, but I've been working on myself. I've changed. I realized how much I took for granted. I was hoping, maybe we could try again. I couldn't believe the audacity. My grip on the phone tightened as I fought to keep my voice steady. You think 6 months and a few apologies can erase what you did? The lies? The betrayal? The humiliation? I know I hurt you, she said quickly, her voice rising with urgency. But I was lost, Jason. I made mistakes, but I'm not that person anymore. Please, can't we at least meet and talk? Meet and talk. I repeated, my voice sharp with disbelief. Nicole, you didn't just make a mistake. You made a series of calculated decisions to deceive me. You lived a life that spat on everything we had. And now that it's all fallen apart, you want to crawl back like none of it happened. There was a pause on her end, and I could hear the faint hitch in her breath. I'm trying to make things right, she whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. You had your chance, Nicole. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. I'm not giving you another opportunity to hurt me. Jason, she started, her voice breaking. No, I interrupted, my tone firm and final. We're done. We've been done. I've moved on, and you need to do the same. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long before she spoke again, barely audible. I still love you. A bitter laugh escaped me. Love? You don't even know what that word means. I ended the call before she could say another word. My hands trembled slightly as I set the phone down. The conversation had stirred up something inside me, a complicated mix of anger, pity, and relief. Anger at her audacity to think she could undo the past, pity for her desperation, and relief that I was no longer the man she could manipulate. That night, I sat on my balcony, gazing out at the glittering city lights. The past 6 months had been a slow but steady journey of healing, of rebuilding my life from the wreckage of her betrayal. Her apology, while far too late, served as a reminder of how far I had come. I had faced the worst of it, and I wasn't going to let her drag me back into her chaos. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I truly felt free.